Let's start a podcast about our mental health for no good reason why. Let's call it Mind Cake.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another slice of Mind Cake.
Mind Cake.
With him,
Lee Crompton, and him.
Paul Beeson.
Yes. Nailed it.
Only took 3 takes.
Yeah, that's fine.
How you doing, Lee?
I am very well. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm back in Scotland for a couple of days.
Hurrah.
So you've got me on a couple of days off, which is good. And I'm just gonna tell you a little story. We got a new oven yesterday.
Where's this going?
And well, partly because I was really chuffing myself because I connected up our new oven by myself and cooked a roast dinner last night.
Because we know you're a big cook, not so much a baker, but you do look to you have to cook.
And ironically, I look like Little Cook from the TV show.
I don't know that.
Big Cook, Little Cook.
No, don't know.
When I was a teacher, one of the kids once told me I looked like Little Cook. I think that's what he said anyway.
I think you probably misheard him.
Yeah, and so anyway, we've got this new oven, and the company, a big electrical company that will remain nameless, were meant to take our old oven away, and then they didn't because it was still connected when they turned up to deliver the new one.
Yeah,
which is fair enough because we didn't realize that was part of the terms and conditions. So they said, "Oh, we'll go away and we'll come back at the end of the day if you can disconnect it yourself. Just leave it out the front." Our old oven, is still sitting on our front path. So this big company won't give us a refund. So we're quite annoyed with them.
Right. So are you just using this podcast as a vehicle to complain about customer service?
Yes, but now I have, and I've got it off my chest. I think we can move on.
Right. You can nod or shake your head. Obviously, don't confirm or deny. Is it Curry's? Okay. Right. Well, moving on. Moving on. How has the Polar Express been?
Oh, it's been magical, actually. So we did our first weekend last weekend there. So we did our first sort of proper 2 full days of shows, and they were great. The audiences have been really responsive. We've had some really nice feedback. Everybody that works on the Polar Express is an absolute joy. It's great.
Right. So because I hadn't appreciated what the Polar Express was, I'm only aware of the film. So you are doing a show on a train.
Yeah.
And
a moving steam train.
Right.
Yeah.
So just run me through. So the punters get on.
And each carriage has a conductor and a couple of chefs. And, we welcome them on, and we do the hot chocolate dance from the film, and we serve them all a hot chocolate and a cookie. Okay. Then we finish telling the story of the Polar Express to them. It's sort of narrated beautifully. We've got these massive big storybooks, and we kind of, get them through the rest of the story. We arrive at the North Pole. Santa gets on board. Santa comes along the train and gives everybody on the train a little bell, which is the first gift of Christmas, like in the film.
Is it? Okay. It's just that you said there at the beginning that you said it was magical. Yeah. Whereas the text that you sent me the other day was that you were already a bit fed up with Christmas. And I'd imagine if you were getting Santa's giving out bells, one could suggest that you might be at your bell's end with Christmas already.
Holy, you are naughty.
Well, that brings us on to segue into swearing, because Grant, we've had a message from Grant who wasn't keen on episode 1. He thought it was rubbish, but then was pleasantly surprised by episode 2. Episode 1, he said, well, obviously we didn't talk about mental health very much, which is a fair comment. He really enjoyed episode 2, apart from the fact the swearing had been bleeped out. He thought that because it's obviously such a raw subject matter, that the swearing should maybe have stayed in. And I just wondered whether you had anything to say to Grant about that.
He's a fucking horrible head.
Other feedback we've had, Claire has been in touch to say that she thinks it's a really interesting episode, thinking about the 2 different perspectives that were going on for Lee and his wife. And it made her think about the complexities of supporting family and friends whilst also caring for ourselves. And she said she was looking forward to episode 3. So thank you for that feedback, Claire. Much better than Grant's.
Yeah, that was lovely. That was lovely.
And so I have met Jan, and we've had a talk about ACT, which, as we suspected, she explained a whole lot better than I did at the end of episode 2. So without further ado, I think we'll get into it. So I'm here today in Steps, which are we classing as Glasgow?
I think the people of Steps would class it as North Lanarkshire.
North Lanarkshire. We're in North Lanarkshire to speak to the lovely Dr. Jan Ferris, otherwise known to me as just Jan. How are you, Jan?
I'm not going to lie, Lee. Today I feel slightly more anxious than you would normally see me.
It's slightly ironic. Jan, who has been seeing me now for over 12 months, 18 months. Maybe.
18 months, March 2022.
Yes. Is far more anxious about doing this. And I don't understand, because this is your gig, this is your thing.
Yes, but even psychologists have stories.
Even
psychologists, absolutely. We notice our emotions as well, and we also have stories in our mind that play out. So I'm very aware that Paul, in episode 1 of your podcast, spoke about almost the worst type of person to interview is a fast-speaking, I was about to say fast-speaking psychologist, a fast-speaking Scottish person.
You did.
I am pretty much that mould.
So you're our one listener.
I am.
Excellent.
I've listened many times as
Very
well.
Good. Can I say that you don't sound like your archetypal clinical psychologist?
And that's the other issue. I have in my mind, one of the stories that absolutely plays is that proper psychologists don't sound like me. But again, it's a complete stereotype. Absolutely. Because I know many psychologists and and we can be a very diverse group with a diverse range of accents.
Yes.
But I know that I'm probably the weediest psychologist.
The weediest psychologist. What do you think it is about this? Right, let's get into your anxiety before we start it. Because you speak to like industry leaders and rooms full of people, and at the minute it's just me and you.
Yes.
With a laptop and a mic that's stuck on with some blue tack.
Yes.
Why do you think?
What I think I share with many psychologists is good going imposter syndrome. And this brings imposter syndrome to the fore. It's not peculiar to me, it's not peculiar to psychologists, but I always see it as the flip side of reflective practice. If you have good reflective practice, it can go a step too far sometimes and really the stories that play in our mind, we'll talk about ACT in a bit, but the stories that play in our mind are, you don't really know what you're talking about, you really, you're really winging this. And so those thoughts come to mind.
But are you better or worse? So it's a room full of people.
Oh no, because
that's still the same feeling.
Less so. I'm quite happy to stand in front of 200 people.
How is it better to stand in front of 200 people than, again, I suppose that's how the mind works?
Yeah.
You find it easier to speak in front of 200 people than just me with a microphone?
Yes. Yeah, in some respects. Don't get me wrong, I would still have stories in my mind that were, triggering emotions, that were, kind of, they're tricky emotions in the moment. But the idea that I might actually have to listen to this back in a room full of people, I walk out the door.
Yeah, and you're done.
And I'm done. And that's okay.
Can I just say that I'm quite enjoying this shift of
Do you feel you're in the wrong chair today?
I'm in the wrong chair today,
You are. Yeah, but again, I think that is, and when we come to ACT, I think it is really, really important that we acknowledge that we all have tricky emotions at times, and that we all have stories that play in our minds, and they can, either take us away from that, they either take us towards a rich and full and meaningful life, or they interrupt that or get in the way of that. That is often the case, and so, that applies to us all. And one of the concepts and one of the chats I have all the time is about value-based living. So you might ask, why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself in this quite uncomfortable place?
Because you've got to walk the walk.
Absolutely, 100%. This, I feel, and I've spoken to you about the podcast, I feel this is really important. I feel that a range of voices getting out a kind of mental health message, a destigmatizing message, a validating message, is a really, really important thing to do.
Well, that's why we're doing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why we're here.
Yes.
And that's why you're putting yourself through the mill by, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So shall we get into ACT? I don't know if you listened to the end of episode 2
I
when I
did.
made a complete horlicks
Yes.
of remembering what ACT was, what it stood for.
Yes.
So, and that's why you're here, because you're the expert.
I am a practitioner and I am an ACT practitioner.
You're an expert, Jan.
Okay.
You are more qualified than me to talk about it. Far more qualified.
So
You're
that,
a doctor.
So that will sit. Yes, I am happy for that to sit.
Can you tell us a bit about ACT, what it stands for, and what it's about?
Absolutely. So ACT is a type of psychotherapy. It's the acronym Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. But when we talk about it, it's very much commonly spoken about as ACT. So whereas other therapies that go with an acronym like CBT for cognitive behavioural therapy, you enunciate the letters, with ACT you don't. You say it as one word. And the message behind it is because a core component of ACT is action. Yeah. It's about, kind of moving towards your rich and full and meaningful life, but doing that through action. Yeah. And so with ACT, we are very much not spelling out the letters. We are very much, communicating one of the core components, one of the core processes from the get-go.
And that's maybe why I couldn't remember what it stood for.
Do you know what I think it's really interesting what you did remember, and we might get to that.
Yes.
It's because I think what you focused on is probably where we started, when we started doing ACT together and working within an ACT framework. So ACT is an empirical psychological approach which fundamentally aims to maximise the human potential for moving towards a rich and full and meaningful life. You will have heard me say that a million times over. Yeah. I'd like to say it was mine. It's my phrase, it's not. Of course, I've absolutely blagged it from an ACT leader, but Russ Harris is someone who talks about it all the time. So it's maximising that human potential, but whilst effectively handling the distress that inevitably comes with living, with being a human being. ACT is about nurturing processes which support psychological flexibility. I talk about psychological flexibility a lot, and I think it's one of those kind of phrases that psychologists talk about, but really what that means, it's about the capacity to act mindfully, guided by our values, guided by what matters to us most.
Yes.
Through an empirical process. ACT have identified, ACT researchers, practitioners, ACT leaders have identified some of the key processes which underpin that psychological flexibility. And that's pretty much what we've been doing in sessions.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose from a layman's perspective, who didn't obviously know anything about it, what I found really useful of knowing who I was, where I was, but specifically after, was then kind of deciding, well, what now?
Yeah.
And who am I, and what am I, and what am I doing?
Yeah.
So I was going to talk about one of the first things we did, because again, you talk about a towards moves and away moves.
Yes.
And a rich and meaningful life with your core values.
Yes.
But if you don't know to start with what your core values are,
yes,
then how do you know whether you're... So one of the exercises we did early on was the deck of cards.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Absolutely. So one of these core processes that underpin psychological flexibility is connecting with values. Values are about who we are. They are qualities that we embody. Everyone has values, but not everyone shares the same values. And so understanding who we are and what we stand for is actually really, really important, and then guiding doing what matters.
Yeah.
So it's almost like one of the first steps, and it certainly was one of the first steps when we worked together.
Yeah.
And so you start having discussions with people about what matters to them most. Now, when you ask that question, most people will talk about domains of their life. So family matters to me most, or physical health matters to me most, and that's kind of areas of people's life. But with values, you start having conversations about when you are in those relationships, when you are looking after your physical health, who do you want to be? Now, you know, it won't surprise you. We have 101, in fact, probably 1,001 ways to have conversations to access with people what their values are. Mm-hmm. You know, I often say to people, you know, imagine it's your 70th birthday.
Yeah.
And as you're standing, all of your loved ones are in the room with you. And they're all standing up to talk about you and about what you mean to them. Mm-hmm. What are the words you want to hear them say? Mm-hmm. So that's, you know...
That's quite powerful, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And I can't remember how many cards there were in the pack. What I found really difficult was put it down to 5, wasn't it? So I had to come up with 5 out of a deck of
50
cards.
Yeah.
It's not that the other 45 have no bearing on my personality or whatever.
No.
So that's why I found it quite difficult, because you're trying to narrow it down to 5.
Yes.
But it might be that there's another 5, another 10 that you think are really important, but are they more or less important than the 5? So how I approached it was, first of all, broke the pack down into 3, into thirds. So this one's not really too important. This one's quite important, and this one I think is the top, whatever it was, 15 cards that I thought were reflective of me or who I would want to be, or what I would want people to say on my 70th birthday.
Yeah.
And then take that 15 cards and then do the same process again to break it down to 5 and 5 and 5. And that's actually really difficult to sit and go, well, that's, I can't think of an example, but this part of my personality is really important. But actually this part of my personality is it a top 5?
Yeah. And I think it is a really, really difficult process, because if you think of some of the values, there are things like trust and love and connectedness, respect, supportiveness. You know, most people will think, actually, they're all really, really important values. Uh-huh. But as I say, you know, you are starting to get people to think of, it's not saying they're not important, but it's thinking about really connecting with who's authentically them.
Yeah. And,
you know, 5's an arbitrary number. You know, I pick 5. We start with the card sorting task, which is, here are all these values, they've all got a wee bit of a definition, and you sort them into not at all important, somewhat important, and very important. And of course the first process is just to take out somewhat important and you know, not at all important. And you can do this in many different ways. So you can do this in the most broadest term. What matters to me most, you know, in that 70th birthday kind of lens, you know, what are the kind of broadest values? But you can also do it with domain specific. So what matters most to me about being a parent? And, you know, you can use this exercise in lots and lots of different ways. What matters most to me about going for this promotion? You know, you can really use this, and it's such a flexible tool that you can use it in lots of different ways. With you, we went with that broad spectrum in the first instance. We did whittle it down to 5, as I say. It's a completely arbitrary number, but it's to really get you to connect with what matters to you most. You might think I'm quite harsh in getting you to do 5, but Renee Brown, who does this task with leaders, she gets them to pick 1. Right. What is your core value?
But interestingly, the other day when we spoke about it, for the first time in 12, 18 months, we revisited what were your core values, and I could only remember 2 of the 5.
And we then had the discussion, does that tell you what is your core value?
Yes.
And
it does.
Yes, it absolutely does. And we could have probably said the same thing. If we had picked it out the deck even before you'd done the task, we could have, you know, knowing you and having spent some time working together, I think you could have nailed it then.
Yes.
Turns out we've done this for 18 months.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It's when you look back reflectively now, you go, well, that's fairly obvious. But at the time, I maybe didn't have a feeling of who I was, where I was, where I went from that place. Yeah. Because it is a strange, like I say, as I said in episode 2, it is a strange place where you should be punching the air because you've been given a second chance. Yeah. And actually, you're left with that feeling of, well, what on earth do I do now? Yeah, and that was a really key kind of emotion and story that was playing for you when you first started meeting with me, wasn't it? Is this feeling of lots of stories of I should. I should be punching the air. I should be appreciating every single moment and savouring every single moment. Yeah. But I'm struggling with that, and I feel really lost in this. You know, the line in the sand moment happened, and I can't go back to, you know, what my brain was like before that. Yeah. My wiring, you know, my stories have now changed, and I need to adjust to this post line in the sand world.
and I feel really adrift.
Well, I think the thing for me, after certainly the cancer, the world didn't seem quite as safe a place as it did previously. Now, whether that was, the cancer reoccurring for me, whether it was, members of your family or whatever, that you realise that we're all in the firing line. And I know we all know this.
Yeah.
That, we're all mortal and it's all going to happen to us sooner or later,
Yeah.
but we don't think about it.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it was there, ever present for me, where everything was viewed as like a threat or danger.
I mean, you really did face the most existential crisis.
Yeah.
That was... So whilst the rest of the world were going through COVID, and many people were very much confronted with loss and disruption and lots of difficult emotional challenges, you and your family had that, but they also had a very definitive kind of conversation. And that, both of those things happening at once really did change your stories, and it changed your lenses. So when you come and start seeing me about 18 months later, it is, what I remember is you starting to kind of almost feel like I'm coming through the fog of the acute phase.
Yeah.
But my world view has completely shifted. Who am I?
Well, that is interesting that, like you say, it took me 18 months after the diagnosis that I then reached out for help.
Yeah.
And was in that fog and was, wanting the way forward.
Yeah.
And then here we are 18 months later doing
a podcast.
Doing a podcast about it.
So from values work, that tells us a bit about knowing what matters, who we are, the type of people we want to be. As I say, what matters to us most. What ACT also kind of emphasises is not just sitting with that. How do we then move towards that? What do we do? The phrase they use is committed action, and it's really doing what matters. So you go from knowing what matters and you're then kind of connecting with doing what matters. And we done that using kind of a variety of techniques, if you like. I remember you'd kind of SMART goals, and I remember having conversations with you about, and if there was a camera on the wall, as you were living your life congruent with these values, and there was a camera following you around, what would it see you doing? And we spoke about writing and creativity and actions to take from those values. And that became part of our therapeutic work.
No, absolutely, and I think for me there was that kind of switch in my head that it doesn't always work, but let's say for example that that going for a run is helpful. So activity is helpful because it's going to help you mentally and get your endorphins going and whatever. It's that sat on the couch with a bar of chocolate, and that's not to say that I don't eat the chocolate, but is it a towards move to actually get your train? Because sometimes that's the hardest part for me, is actually pulling on my trainers and getting over the threshold. So is it a towards move to just sit and do nothing and eat the chocolate? Or is the towards move to pull on your trainers, go for a run, and then eat the chocolate? No, but you know what I mean? Is that there is that switch in my head of is this a towards move or an away move? And
we use the choice point. That's another kind of tool where it's that I'm moving towards that rich and full and meaningful life. Or I'm noticing tricky thoughts and feelings coming up, that are maybe interfering with that, and I'm getting more stuck on a kind of vicious cycle or a ruminative loop that isn't taking me towards that kind of rich and full and meaningful life. And it's interesting to me that one of the first things you remember, as being almost ACT, is the values cards, because I know that there was also a lot of steps before that.
See, my brain doesn't
remember that.
No.
And a lot of what we spoke about initially was self-compassion.
Right.
Was about validating and normalising a lot of the stories that were playing in your mind.
See, in my brain, I've kind of forgotten that. If you've asked me where did we start, I would have said the cards. Which is,
again, when you were asked what ACT was, you went to compassion, and I think that's because what we started with, where that notion, again, that kind of process of acceptance, which is about opening up, and it's a capacity to make room for these tricky internal experiences.
Yeah.
So our thoughts, our memories, our images, our feelings, instead of trying to squash them down or fight with them, we sit with them and we let them pass. And I remember the very kind of early stages of our work, there being a lot of conversations, and kind of like we've touched on already, where you were kind of chatting a lot about, I should be loving every moment of life. I should be ecstatic all the time.
Yeah.
But it's not my lived experience. And I think that's a really, really common experience for people who've have faced a similar type of challenge you have, that kind of existential moment, or they have chronic physical health problems, they have chronic pain, or there are many different experiences of distress where you just don't want the feeling. You want to just get rid of it, or you think, well, I should be doing this and I should be doing that, and I shouldn't be doing this and I shouldn't be doing that. And I think that can become really, really, kind of almost punishing for people, and that almost away move where we get stuck in that ruminative loop, which interferes with what we can move towards.
What I think is interesting about ACT is that what you've just spoken about, there were, and it sounds like I'm being disparaging, but there were people who were saying, but you didn't die, did you? So, not get over yourself. But you didn't die, so that's good, isn't it? So we're reinforcing that, well, why aren't you clipping your heels? Because you didn't die. So that's great, isn't it?
100%. And I remember us talking about you having had those conversations.
I thought you were going to mention, now you're going to drop me in it then, Jan.
No, never. I remember having those conversations. I remember you coming telling me about the mental health practitioner that told you to change the narrative.
Yeah.
And, and I remember that actually that's not an ACT. That's less, in my view, less helpful, because of course you were experiencing, totally understandably, really difficult feelings at that time. And so the job is not to squash them down.
No.
The job is to notice them, name them, and open up to experiencing them.
Yeah.
Because, and people often have this conversation with me. I work with lots and lots of people where squashing down, or this kind of desire not to have, is almost our therapeutic goal. And the paradox of it is, the more we try and squash down or not to have, the more we get stuck in that cycle, and we start layering. So what maybe starts as one tricky emotion, let's say anxiety, I'm worried about my health in the future, but actually I'm worried about my health in the future, but I shouldn't be worried about my health in the future, because I should be embracing every moment. So now I'm irritated with myself, I'm annoyed with myself, I'm disappointed with myself. So rather than just starting with that, noticing that I feel anxious, you're now dealing with anxiety, disappointment, frustration, and it just layers upon layers. The other thing is that thoughts and feelings, I always talk to my clients about whack-a-mole, the fair game, whack-a-mole, that if we suppress them, if we try and thought suppress, well, we can't. If I say to you, please don't think about a pink elephant sitting in that chair wearing a purple top hat, what are you thinking of? Yeah? So firstly, you really can't thought suppress. But if you try, it just feels like whack-a-mole. How are you thought suppressing? Well, I'm thought suppressing by just going into a kind of threat-based drive mode, always keeping myself busy. Okay, and then what happens? Is that taking you towards a rich and full and meaningful life? Or is it getting you stuck in actually when I then lie in my bed at night, it then comes to the front of my mind then, and I'm then struggling with sleep. You're just whacking them all. So the acceptance component, that opening up component, is tricky, because who wants to feel tricky, difficult, challenging emotions?
Yeah, but I think you're saying about talking about acceptance.
Yeah.
So I've come from a place where I was almost embarrassed to talk about, and shameful sort of emotions to talk about. Yeah. Because you should be over it. Was what I was getting from, not everybody, but some voices. Yeah. Which played into my own
Yeah.
Like I have to say that the vast majority of people were very supportive.
Yeah.
But when some people are saying that, you do tend to shut down and not speak about it. 18 months on, we're now in a place where I'm going, well, balls to that.
Yeah.
I'm doing a podcast about it.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about me, and I'm going to talk about you, and I'm going to talk about, talk about your anxieties while I'm doing the podcast.
Yes.
And so I think that is, if that's not an advert for ACT, where I've gone from, I shouldn't really be mentioning this to...
Yeah. Actually, we open up and let's
do a
about
podcast
this.
about it.
Yeah. We allow these things to happen.
Yeah. I'm accepting that's how I feel, and I want to talk about it. And actually, I make it all about me, but I actually felt great after doing that second episode.
Yeah.
It just felt like I just got a lot off my chest.
Yeah.
And told, rather than little sound bites or whatever, I'd had a whole hour to just talk about this is what happened.
Yes.
And this is how it made me feel, rather than, like you say, trying to shut that down and be a bit almost embarrassed about it.
And it is that real allowing it to happen, isn't it? It's kind of leaning into that. And sometimes when we talk about acceptance, people think it can jar as a term, almost because does acceptance mean I must enjoy?
Mm-hmm.
No, it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that you enjoy sitting with sadness or sitting with frustration.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the alternative.
Sorry, when you mentioned sadness and joy there, that'd be an ideal time to mention one of your favourite films.
I am so excited about June 2024 because Inside Out 2.
Is it really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh, I can share the link with you.
And is it her as a teenager?
Yes.
Right.
It is Riley.
Sorry.
For
those who don't know.
Yes. We should actually say one of my favourite films, for many reasons, is the film Inside Out, the Disney Pixar film Inside Out. And one of the reasons I absolutely love it is because of that understanding of emotions. Actually, it was deeply researched at the time as well, which, the geek in me absolutely loves. But bringing into mainstream that we all have emotions, we all have different, we all experience the wide range of emotions. It's part of being human.
Yeah.
And that, that being the dominant focus of a kid's film that adults like me absolutely love.
Oh, there are some stuff in there that I don't even understand.
Oh, it's amazing.
In the first one. What's the bit when they go through, off the train and they go into one dimension and there are two dimensions and then I don't understand abstract thought and that,
yes, it's
for
almost
a kids' film. That's quite.
Yes, it's almost Piagetian stages of cognitive development. Let's not test me any further than that.
No,
That's as much as my knowledge goes. Okay. And the trailer for, sorry, this is a complete side, but the trailer for next year brings in anxiety into the teenage brain. And what's really kind of funny is that I have teenagers in my life, and I've had family members going, "Look, is this not just? Is this not so true?" So I hope it does not. I hope it does not disappoint.
So the trailer is out.
Yes,
right,
the trailer.
I will. We'll put the link on the page as well for those who haven't seen it. But okay. Well, that's something to look forward to.
It's something.
Yes, joy and sadness.
And fear and disgust. And anxiety is the one who's in there. Anger. Oh, the wee red guy. The wee red guy. As I say, the desk, the switchboard of emotions just broadens, and I am very excited.
Yeah, should be good.
Yeah, I sometimes go into. I don't work with children, but I have went into a school in the past and talked to them about what my job is, and what I did was took in the figurines out of Inside Out and just talked to kids about feelings.
Cool.
It was pretty cool. Yes.
Okay.
So back to ACT.
Sorry. Yeah. So as you will have known if you've listened to the first two, they do tend to go off at tangents.
And I will follow you in that tangent.
The problem is, it's normally Paul that keeps me straight, and I do feel slightly exposed. That I'm so for the first time I've had to do the recording and the tech side of things, and it's me that normally goes off at tangents, and then Paul is the glue that brings it back on point.
Is he the man with boundaries?
He's the one who does all the keeps it all.
That can be no bad thing.
To be fair, I don't think we've gone off piece too much.
No, and we've only talked about 3 of the 6 processes.
Oh goodness, right. Well, you better crack on then, Jan.
So I don't need to talk about the other three, but I think they might be helpful just so that people get a kind of overview of the kind of different processes that we know that can really nurture this idea of psychological flexibility to act mindfully congruent with your values. So another of the processes that is that kind of noticing your thinking. I've spoke a few times, I've spoke already about we all have stories. We all have stories that play in our mind. Some of the stories we have grown up with, our experiences very much shape our stories, and it shapes our lenses. So we have kind of themes that come through and we're thinking, and diffusion is one of the techniques where it's about noticing the stories that play. So it's about the capacity to step back from your thinking or step back from those thoughts and images, and it's to see them for what they are. They're just collections of words and pictures. And we can, if they are taking us towards a rich and full and meaningful life, we can allow them to guide us. But if they are not, if they're less helpful, then we can use diffusion to try and help us just manage the distress that sometimes comes with those thoughts and images.
So what do you mean by diffusion?
So diffusion is about kind of stepping back from those thoughts and images.
And recognising them for just that.
Yeah, so one of the ways that we used, I think, in therapy was about noticing the tape that was playing. So for you, the I shoulds, or, I should be feeling ecstatic, elated all the time, even when it's a normal Tuesday. And so it was starting to notice that was the tape that was playing, or other people think I should, other people have said to you, and that then taking root in your your kind of thinking. But again, it was taking you away from that rich and full and meaningful life. I think one of when you spoke about Brian in the second podcast,
there's been quite a lot of chat about Brian actually on the social media. A lot of people either know a Brian or think that he is based on someone, but he's not. You were mentioning about Paul's.
Yes. Paul's cousin
friend.
in Australia. I think he'd mentioned it was his cousin in Australia. That discussion you had in the second podcast of his technique of that's a BS thought. That's a brilliant diffusion technique. That really is doing two things. It's noticing it's a thought. So it's using the noticing mind rather than the thinking mind. It's noticing it's a thought, and it's diffusing it by almost using humour or abruptness. That's a BS thought. You're that's a brilliant diffusion technique.
And thank you for saying BS, because it just saves me a lot of bother with the bleep machine. He said it about 4 times, I think, in episode 2.
I heard the bleeps.
It's actually because I'm a bit of a novice at this, and getting the bleeps in the right place was actually a bit of a pain. So future reference, we'll just use BS, a BS belief.
Most people know what that stands for, I think.
I think so. Yeah.
I think so.
If you don't listen to episode 2, and you'll get it from the bleeps.
Yes.
Also, I'd heard somewhere, or I might have dreamt this, that if you've got your internal voice saying, oh, you're not good enough, you're not, whatever that negative. If you're trying to, it's not easy, but if you try and imagine that in a silly voice.
It's a diffusion technique. There are many, many diffusion techniques, and ACT is very much a formulation-based approach where we meet the person where they're at, and we use the approach in an individually tailored way. So some of your worries and thoughts, I was never going to get you to say it in a silly voice. It would have been entirely inappropriate. So with those, it was a whapping dose of compassion, noticing, accepting, opening up and experiencing those, kind of difficult internal experiences. But you're right, there is a, I think that the term that's sometimes called a smorgasbord of kind of ways that we can manage these difficult times. They are part of being human. Difficult emotions, difficult thoughts, memories, images, urges, all part of being human.
I think for someone who's particularly hard on themselves, and trying not to beat yourself up as much, and recognising that, I think I found really useful.
A lot of our acceptance work was on focusing on a compassionate self, and the technique that I would often use with you is, what would you say to someone else? What would you say to a friend, someone who you deeply cared about, who was experiencing the same distress you're experiencing with those same, life experiences?
Yeah.
What would you say to them? And you always gave me the compassionate response.
Yeah.
And so we always noticed that disconnect or that paradox. And what would it be like if you treated yourself like you would compassionately notice someone's distress and move towards alleviating that? What if that's what you start doing? What happens then?
And also there was a point where you said that you could, as a core belief, I think it was you, it might have been somebody else, so if someone had said something that you thought was not helpful, you've broken the golden rule.
So I think that might have been a diffusion technique we discussed.
I can't confirm or deny whether it was you that said it. I mean, you can shake your head or nod your head, but somebody said that the golden rule is don't be a dick. Now, as a professional, you can either confirm or deny that was one of the benefits. One of your strengths, Lee, is your sense of humour. So we could use a range of techniques that helped you diffuse. Yes.
There was a lot of I shoulds, there was a lot of other people, and I think we could compassionately hold them as well. People felt awkward, they didn't know what to say, they moved away from their own experience of distress, they don't want to stick in it. People will do almost anything, as we've said, to try and not experience difficult feelings. So in those moments people might say less than helpful things, and you experienced a number of those, sometimes even from mental health professionals. And so, one of the diffusion techniques, one of the ways to help you, kind of move with that,
was to use that expression.
Don't be a tube. That's how I remember it.
I don't know whether that's a Scottish thing, isn't it?
Oh, it might be.
I don't think that's.
Oh, how does that translate then?
Don't be a dick.
Do you know, Lee, this is your podcast.
And I'm not even sure we have to bleep that out. I don't know. I'll check it with Paul.
Check with Paul.
Yeah, I'll check with Paul. But how many more have we got to get through, Jan?
Only one, I think. So two, actually.
Go on then.
We'll blast through them.
Yes.
So the other two processes that underpin psychological flexibility. One of them is that very much be here now. And I actually wanted to raise this because I listened to your second podcast, and I don't think I'd heard the story of when you were in acute distress, and that line in the sand had been drawn. You'd been to those appointments in those very early days. All you could cope with was the next 10 minutes. And I think your brain went into kind of protective survival mode, which is actually just bring it into the here and now. So much of our distress is when we future focus further down the line, or when we kind of ruminate and think over and wish differently what's happened in the past. And so kind of, the Buddhist mindfulness tradition is very much this. It's very much the contact with the present moment, that be here now. It's flexibly paying attention to our experiences in this moment. And it really did strike me, actually, when I heard that second podcast. That's what your brain was doing.
I think it's one of those things that I kind of forgot. That's what I did. Yeah, because like I say, to think, to go back to Brian, but to think too far ahead was just too awful. So you just literally broke it down. And I think that's quite interesting with tasks as well. If you've got something particularly difficult, don't look at the end result. Just break it down into, well, just do this bit, just do that bit, and
and that's, it's mindfulness, but it's also part of that doing what matters. When things feel overwhelming, I think Paul had said, actually, he had heard that that's a really good approach. He's absolutely right. It's if something is 1,000 steps long, you only need to take the first step. It's only focusing on what's
cleverer than he looks, Paul.
I don't know what he looks like.
That's why I said it. But yeah, and I think we spoke about this the other day, talking about breaking things down into component parts and being mindful.
Yes.
That my younger self would be rolling their eyes, because I did it again today.
Yeah.
I went for a run. For someone who thought I needed music to distract me from, I think my ankles hurt, I'm out of breath,
Yeah.
I've got a stitch,
Yeah.
whatever it is. Then actually the other day I couldn't be bothered to get my music out of the car.
Yeah.
Because there's some people that will appreciate this, but I don't listen to music on my phone. I still listen to music on my iPod.
I entirely appreciate that.
I get ribbed for it at work, but that's what I do. And I couldn't be bothered, or it wasn't charged or whatever, so I thought I'd just go out, and I covered up my watch. I didn't take my music.
Yeah.
And I went out, and I actually just, this is a bit happy clappy, but I just listened to the birds, the environment, my feet on the tarmac, and actually, rather than running to the beat of the song, or to the watch, I need to go a bit quicker, or I need to slow down. Just actually feeling in your body, I think I could go a bit quicker, or do you know what, I'm a bit out of puff, just slow it down. And not looking at my watch, not looking at times.
Yes.
And actually, I was thinking about this today, it's quite interesting that I went from a place where after, and I think me and Paul are going to come onto this at a later date, but after I'd had my operations and had my radioactive iodine treatment, all I wanted to do was almost to prove. So I did some looking back now, I did some stupid things that I should never have done physically.
Yeah.
But I wanted to somehow prove that I was as fit or fitter than I was previously, because I wanted to stick my 2 fingers up at cancer.
Yes.
And then I've kind of gone into full circle where I've gone, right, well, do you know what? I just, as long as I could run, I actually wanted to run 5k today, I didn't run 4. I'd got to 4 and I've had enough.
Yeah.
And I just stopped.
Yeah.
And it didn't really matter about it. Yes, I look at the time afterwards and go, actually it was whatever it was.
Yeah.
But I'm not there looking every half kilometre, every kilometre, checking my time.
Yeah.
And using music as a distraction. Mindful running.
Mindful running.
Who would have thought that of me?
What did you notice? What did you notice in the moment and afterwards?
Well, I would say in the moment, I'm not necessarily, so that I noticed, I do tune into the sound of my feet on the pavement, or of my breathing, or of just the view, the birds, but at the same time, actually, you're not distracted by the music. So I was thinking about storylines, and scripts, and Christmas presents, and whatever, and then bring it back to, how am I feeling now? Half a kilometre on. I probably need to slow it down a bit, or another. So I'm not saying I was totally immersed in that moment.
Yeah.
My mind still wanders off to other places, and that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
But actually, I wasn't distracted by the music. I wasn't distracted by my watch.
Yeah.
I was just going out and running for however many minutes.
Yeah.
And then when I was burst, I was burst.
And really connecting with that present moment.
And really connecting with that present moment. Who'd have thunk it? But there we are.
Yes. Yeah.
The air conditioning's come on now, so if you hear a little bit of a buzz in the background, it's recreating the fridge buzz from Paul's kitchen.
Fraser the freezer.
Fraser the freezer, yes.
We don't have Fraser the freezer.
For the air conditioning
unit.
No,
we just have air conditioning.
Air conditioning unit.
The very final process.
Yes.
Is this idea of a noticing self. So we've touched on some of the other processes. We've touched on acceptance and diffusion and committed action and kind of being here now. That kind of mindfulness kind of approach. For a lot of these processes are interconnected in that they are benefit when the others are strong. They also benefit. So the kind of noticing self is this idea that we have a thinking brain and a noticing brain. So if I get you to spend 5 minutes noticing what you're thinking, you can identify all those thoughts, all those images, all the memories, whatever's coming through your brain, but you're doing it from a noticing perspective. If we can connect with the noticing self, we can help create a space between that thinking self that tells us all these stories and that noticing self. I often talk about helicoptering over. There's a really good clip that does the rounds on social media, or the Instas of the world. I'm sorry, I don't do any of those things. Where it's Tom Hanks sitting with a group of very esteemed actors. And they ask the question of them, what piece of advice do you wish you could give your younger self? Have you seen it?
I've seen those interviews, yes.
Yeah.
I can't think yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think he's sitting with De Niro actually, but I might be making that up.
Yeah.
And he says, this too shall pass.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, when you're in deep distress, or when you're really, overwhelmed, if you could know, this too shall pass.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can notice,
Yeah.
this too shall pass. You can take that helicopter view.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think what was interesting is what he also said is in your most joy, when you are in your best form, it's also important to remember this too shall pass.
Uh-huh.
And we, that noticing self allows us to create that space
Mm-hmm.
where we can really kind of hold that essence.
Yeah.
That wherever we are, whatever stories are playing, if we can look in from the top of them
Mm-hmm.
and just know that this too shall pass.
I think that, and that's something that I've always found very useful, because it's mentioned in the chimp paradox.
Yes.
Where, like you say, you're in that distress in that moment.
Yes.
And I touched on it really with the Heather thing before the line in the sand.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't sent the work email, or I'd put on a couple of pounds and I hadn't gone for the run, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And then you realise that none of that actually matters.
Yeah.
And the very little that does actually matter. And I think, I say in the chimp paradox, it is having that moment of, you're wound up in the moment, and then helicoptering above and going, right, stretch out that timeline.
Yeah.
In a year, in 5 years or 10 years, how important is it over the span of your life, or even that day, that month?
Yeah.
How important is it that that's right or wrong?
Yeah.
Again, noticing
Yes.
is actually not that. 9 times out of 10.
Yeah.
It's not that important.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things.
Yes.
But it's having that ability, because, well, like you say, when you're in the moment, it's very easy to get wrapped up in that.
Yeah. And when you're in that moment and you are wrapped up in that, that's when we get stuck in these kind of ruminative loops, or these avoidance behaviours, or these struggles with trying to, to suppress. And that takes so much energy. It takes so much focus. And so the helicopter view allows you to kind of just take that half a step above and think, okay, I can engage in some acceptance. I can practice some mindfulness.
Yeah.
And I
Go
can
for a mindful run.
Yeah. Mindful run, not with music.
No, not with music.
So yeah, and I can kind of think about who I am, what I want to be, or what I want to do, and to connect with that. So to connect with values and committed action.
Yeah.
What's going to take me towards who I want to be, and towards that rich and full and meaningful life.
Excellent. Can I just touch on something that I think we should have done at the beginning?
Yes.
Which I was going to talk about.
Yes.
And I found it difficult when I was searching for a person.
Yes.
What is the difference between a counsellor, psychologist, clinical psychologist?
Yeah.
And then how do you, so once you've narrowed that down to, right, well, I think I need to see, whatever it is, a counsellor.
Yeah.
Or clinical psychologist, then pinpointing, well, because there's lots of people out there with seemingly different specialities.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether you want to talk about a little bit about if someone is maybe looking to find someone, the best way of doing that.
I think it's firstly to absolutely validate that experience of there are so many different types of practitioners who work with people who experience distress. Counsellors, clinical psychologists, counselling psychologists, psychotherapists, CBT therapists. There are a broad spectrum of different practitioners who all have, as you've said, different types of training, different psychological models that they practice from, different levels of training, and it is such a confusing field for anyone to try and get their head round what the differences might be.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've worked with GPs who really struggle to tell the difference. And so it is with absolute validation. I say, I completely get, how confusing that must be to anyone, never mind someone who is reaching out at a time of distress. So without getting into the kind of detail of what the differences are, I had said to you, hopefully Paul's tech savvy and we can put in a link which kind of just describes the different training or the different experiences of those kind of main titles that we just described. One of the things I would say for anyone who is engaging or looking to engage in talking therapy of some description is to check the qualifications and kind of experience of the people that they're engaging with. It is okay for you to ask what people's qualifications are. It is okay for you to ask what experience people, practitioners have. I think one of the key things that I know a lot of my clinical psychology colleagues really emphasise when we are talking to people is the importance of regulation. Talking therapists should be regulated. We are part of regulatory bodies. I'm part of the HCPC, which is the Healthcare and Professionals Council, and I have to be part of that organisation to call myself a clinical psychologist. I need to evidence that I have the appropriate qualifications, and they are the body who produce professional guidelines and practice guidelines, and if anyone was to make a complaint about my practice, that's who they would go to. I think it's really important that people have that they are part of a regulatory body. If you're seeing someone, that they're part of a regulatory body. It becomes really confusing because in the UK, the term clinical psychologist is a legally protected title. You cannot use that title unless you are appropriately qualified and registered with the HCPC. The same for health psychologist, counselling psychologist. It is not the same for the term psychotherapist, counsellor, psychologist. So you can call yourself a psychologist and you have done no training.
Oh, really?
Yes, it is not a protected title.
It
is not a protected title. So that's why I think it is really important that when people seek support, that they have a very upfront conversation. And this is something that I and my colleagues at the wellbeing rooms, it's the practice that the room rental practice that I own, with two of my partners, Joe and Catherine, is that we've written a blog that kind of details this, that details the differences in different types talking therapists, but also highlights the importance of regulation. It is something that is so important in in my values and my professional community's values of making sure the public have a safe service.
For me, and I'm sure it's the same for everybody else, you have that moment where, actually accepting, talk about acceptance, actually accepting, do you know what, I think I need some help. And making that decision, I'm going to get some help. And then you open this minefield of, well, who do I go to and who do I need to see? And like you say, who's... And then something that we spoke about the other day, it's one thing saying you still could have 5 registered clinical psychologists, but you might only click with one of them. So one of the things that you could talk about that one of the things that you do right at the beginning is
do that introductory telephone call. Now, if someone is seen in the NHS, they are appointed a therapist. If they don't know the reason why they're seeing a CBT therapist versus a clinical psychologist, they can absolutely ask the department, and the person who's triaged them or made that decision should be able to provide them with information regarding that. In private practice, if you're seeing someone who works privately, most people in private practice have some online presence. So they've got a bit of a blurb that tells you their qualifications, their experience, and any special interest or special training they might have had, what types of therapies they might be practicing. But again, if you don't know what the types of therapies are, that just seems like a whole blur of words. But the conversation we had the other day of what we know is really, really important is that therapeutic relationship, that connection, that, creation of a safe space where someone is listened to, it's non-judgmental, and it's very, their experience is very much validated. We know, separate from the type of treatment you get, is a really key factor in determining the success of any outcome in therapy. It's a really, really important part. I think a really helpful way for people to determine whether the therapist they are seeing on a screen might be someone that they can develop that therapeutic relationship with is to have that initial telephone call. So most of us, not everyone, but most talking therapists will offer a 15-minute kind of initial telephone call where, and I always say in my initial telephone call, the purpose of today's call is to make sure I am the right fit for you. That is, the principal point of this phone call. There is not one size fits all. There are people who absolutely will feel like I'm a good match for them, and I feel that I have the skills and competencies to work with them. But there are people, who it just feels like I've not got the right vibe for them, and that's absolutely fine. It is okay to say, actually, thanks very much for the telephone call, but I'm going to kind of just continue to explore my other options. There is really not a problem in doing that. And people should be given the time to think about it and to before making that decision. It's really important. It is really, really important. There are directories of therapists, counselling directories, Psychology Today, those types of directories. And I think even if you're going to very established large practices of therapists, I think it's okay to say, can I have a quick telephone call with the person just to make sure that I feel the vibe, that I feel there's a vibe of connection, that we've got the start or the seeds of a kind of therapeutic relationship. It's obviously not going to be established in that one call.
No, but it's a good indicator.
Yeah, it's just where the vibe. You can kind of just make a informed guess or a better informed decision other than just information on a screen.
Well, I think, like I say, you can make a judgment, rightly or wrongly, but you can make a judgment about someone within 15 minutes as to whether this is someone I think I could talk to or someone that just... I don't think it's going to be a good fit.
And that's okay. Especially if it's your treatment, if it's your intervention.
Yeah, you've got to feel that you're comfortable talking to that person.
Yes.
Because you're going to do a lot of talking.
Have you found that, Lee?
Yeah. Well, I'm doing the podcast now, so it's a bit more talking. But,
more talking,
but I'm okay with that. So I think what we'll do is get Paul, the tech wizard, to post a link to your website, blog.
So it is a blog on the Wellbeing Room's website,
which runs through the different types of
practitioners who offer talking therapies. It maybe not be all the different types of titles, but the kind of main ones of the different types of talking therapists, and it also talks about that really important part about regulation, about making sure that the people that you're working with have a regulatory body, because that's about safeguarding the public.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want some cake?
I do. I've been looking at this. So Jan has brought in some homemade cake, which I've heard the legend of this family recipe. Now,
yes.
You'll know that I'm not allowed to eat this on air. So I'm going to... It does smell good. It smells delicious.
So I will listen to this podcast. Yeah. I will fast forward to the end for the reasons I said at the beginning, where I couldn't possibly listen to the podcast myself.
Are you not going to listen to this? Was there any point in that where you felt that I'm okay, I'm in my groove now?
Yeah.
Right.
Pretty quickly.
Right, good.
I feel...
I did notice that with the body language, you did seem to, the first, I would say 5-10 minutes.
Yes.
And then it was like talking to
Jan.
To Jan.
To Just Jan.
Just Jan.
Just Jan's back in the room. Absolutely, because, and again, it's not uncommon. Anticipatory anxiety is a really, is a common type of anxiety. The stories that play through are often predicting that future. So maybe I should, practice more mindfulness kind of drop more anchors.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I was going to say about anchor, actually. Talking about dropping anchors. So I wear on my, it's quite grubby now because it's 3 years old, but I wear an anchor on an anchor bracelet, which has got just inscribed on it, hope.
Yes.
I think it was about £4 off eBay.
Uh-huh.
But what I didn't know was that the anchor, and not that I am religious in any way, shape or form, but the anchor is the Christian symbol for hope.
Oh, okay.
Which is why it's an anchor.
Okay.
And also, what I should say is this podcast, the platform, when I was looking at platforms, one of them is called Anchor. Now, Anchor has been taken over from Spotify, so you'll find that the majority of this now all goes out on Spotify.
Yes.
But,
Anchor was there first.
The main reason that I picked this platform was it was called
Anchor.
There you go. Anyway, back to the cake.
So the cake,
yes,
I baked with my own fair hands today.
Can I try a little bit?
Of course you can.
Eat it really quietly.
So I have...
This is homemade, yes.
Homemade. I have only one recipe that I can bake a cake from. And I used... Sorry, I'm laughing at Lee's face.
That's so good.
It is, it's really good, isn't it? And I have made this same recipe of brownie for the last, I'd say maybe 15 years. And I worked in a team where we used to bring and share, and my bring and share was always the brownie, and people would ask me for my recipe.
Yeah.
And I would explain very sincerely that I unfortunately could not share that recipe because it was my great granny's recipe for an American brownie.
Different heritage.
10 generations Glaswegian, but I've got an American brownie. The recipe was my great granny's, and the team, were very, very respectful of my, need to keep that that recipe secret. Absolutely. And it was only, I'd worked in this team for a very long time, and it was only sometime just shortly before I left that I explained to the team that the long held family recipe is actually, if you go to Costco and you buy Ghirardelli brownie mix and
we should put a link on to that, because that is the business. And honestly, that is delicious.
And you add an egg, some oil and water. I cannot bake for love nor money, so. But you don't want,
You don't want to tell people.
No, you want to take the credit as if it's been...
lied?
Yes.
That's a strong word, isn't it?
But I did.
But you did. But I can see why, because that is delicious. Right, well, we will put a link out for the Costco brownies.
Ghirardelli. It's the Ghirardelli brownie mix from Costco.
Okay.
It is the dream.
It is.
So I'm glad you enjoyed it.
And you made me a cup of tea.
I did.
It was very nice.
Thank you.
Jan, Dr. Jan, thank you so much. I hope people found that really useful. I know I did, and I've been seeing you for 18 months. So thank you ever so much for your time, and I will be seeing you again next week anyway.
Yeah, you will. Okay. So you're more than welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Fabulous. What a lovely interview that was. Jan had no reason to be apprehensive about chatting on the podcast. She was quite nervous about it, wasn't she?
She was very nervous, yes, bless her. But she brought me cake.
Oh, well, I mean, that's
homemade cake, which we haven't got today, but I've kind of already eaten mine. Can I make a confession? If Jan, it appears that Jan has listened to all the episodes so far. She gave me a Tupperware with 4 slices of brownie in, one of which I ate when I was there, and the other 3 were for my wife and my 2 children. By the time I got back from speaking to Jan, it was quite late. I was making myself a cup of tea. I also had the other piece of brownie. So the kids didn't get any brownie. But they didn't know that. It's his face. So
I wonder.
So I ate, and to be fair, Gemma ate the other child's piece of brownie. So we had 2 pieces of brownie each, and the children didn't get any.
So you're both terrible people. Okay.
Both terrible people and terrible parents, yes.
I mean, your children aren't listening to this podcast now, but I mean, they might do one time in the future, right? And then that could open up a whole can of worms.
Well, yeah, I think we've got bigger fish to fry than eating a brownie. But anyway,
back to the interview.
Yeah, no, I think it was quite reflective as well, to be perfectly honest, as to what I remember and don't remember from from what we discussed. But no, Jan, always a pleasure. Thank you for your time and insight into the world of ACT.
Yes, thank you, Jan. It was such an eloquent and easy listen, actually, and I learned a lot from listening to you guys talking. And I believe that we've got a link to Jan's blog.
Oh, good. Yeah, see, that's why he's here for the housekeeping. We have, so on our link tree, we now have a link to the wellbeing rooms, which is where Jan works, which gives the link to therapists, to how to, the differences between, as we discussed at the end of the episode, the differences between the different types of therapists and psychologists and psychotherapists, and sort of a guide into how to pick one. So there's a link to that. There is also a link to the world famous Costco brownies. So that is on there as well, in case you want to try Jan's brownies for yourself.
Yeah, and we will add other cakes and stuff like to that link tree as we go.
One thing I would like to point out as well, Ian has been in contact. Sorry, moving on to different comments. Ian has been in contact and has blown my mind about funeral music.
All right, okay.
Because I said that I would want Let's Go Crazy by Prince.
You did say that, I remember.
Yeah, let's get nuts. Let's search for the purple banana till they put us into trusts. He responded by saying, with the same lyrics, but until they put us into trucks.
Trunks?
Trucks, as in...
Trucks.
Yeah. So I thought, well, that's wrong, because I've obviously for the last however many years been singing put us into trusts. And I Googled it, and it is put us into trucks.
Oh, who knew? Well,
Ian did.
Ian did, yeah.
Ian did. But yes, we've had, he's from Glasgow, but we have had messages from Ferris, Jill, Fee in Washington, Sophie in Brisbane, Tony in the Whitsunday Islands. There you go.
Wow, we're quite international, aren't we? Somebody
in Norway.
And we think this person in Norway is someone we don't know. Is that right?
Well,
I know you know.
Well, I don't. I think it's. I do know someone in Norway, so I'm presuming it's Sigrid.
No way.
Oh Jesus!
Hey,
if it is you, Sigrid, drop me a message. If not, if you are the random Norwegian, then please do get in touch. A Canadian, because it tells you where all the people come from. You see, it's quite interesting. Wow. I love the stats.
You do love the stats. You're like knee deep in the stats, aren't you?
I'm knee deep in the stats. One person I should mention as well is Dan from New Zealand.
All right.
Hi, Dan. He said I enjoyed this one, guys. Thank you. If I was producing your funeral, Lee, I might be tempted to close out with yakety sax. Now, the thing is, until I revisited this morning, I read that last week and thought, oh, yakety sax. Yeah, that's the one. Yakety sax. Don't talk back.
Don't talk back.
Yeah, which I think was the theme tune for one of Clive Anderson's chat shows.
Clive Anderson Talks Back, I believe it was called.
That would be the one. And then I don't know why something twigged in my brain. I went, oh, hang on a minute. No, yakety sax is the Benny Hill theme tune.
Oh.
So, Dan, if you could just clarify, I presume you mean the Benny Hill theme tune rather than yakety... Well, what's that? It must be called yakety yak, is it?
That's yakety yak. Yeah.
Right, okay. So I presume it's the Benny Hill theme tune.
Well, maybe we could close this episode out with the Benny Hill theme tune.
Well, maybe we should do that. My alternative funeral music. He's also suggested that Fraser should have his own show.
Yeah, do you know, partly why I'm recording this episode with you in my little office upstairs is because I didn't want that bloody Fraser upstaging me. Fraser's got a lot of love. Almost as much love as Elmo Pickles did in episode 1. Right? So, you know, we're knocking our pans in every fortnight doing this podcast, and we've been upstaged by Elmo Pickles and a fridge. On to brighter and better things. So, talking about people who've got in contact, we got our first ever email.
Woohoo! Our only email.
Our first ever email from a listener. We get lots of spam from various other things. But we got a lovely email from a lad called Jamie. Now, Jamie was actually at school with me. And you know, we've kind of lost touch a bit over the last couple of decades, but we're sort of Facebook chums, and we kind of keep a little eye on what's going on each other's lives and things like that. But I didn't know he was a listener, and he sent us this lovely email, which I'm going to read out, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, Paul and Lee. I hope you're both well. I listened to the first episodes of the podcast today and wanted to say what a great listen. Lee's story is incredible. The way he tells it is a credit to him, his family, and friends. I'm looking forward to the next episode already.
Very good.
Strong start. Strong start. And Jamie goes on to say, I've had my own health issues. I was born with only half a working heart.
Oh, wow.
A bit like me, my parents were told Jamie will only live until a year old at best. Well, I'm 45 now and going nowhere soon, which is fantastic to hear.
Brilliant.
Over the years, I've had 4 major open heart operations, the last one in 2016. Due to having worldly belongings, I was told to get my will up to date as my chances of survival were very slim.
Mm-hmm.
There have been 100 plus smaller operations and procedures and lots of side effects.
Jesus.
So really been through the mill, poor lad. My specialist has already had a chat with me about the future and said I will need a heart and liver transplant at some stage. I only started to work on the mental health side of things just before lockdown, and my aim is to be able to tell my story in a positive way like Lee is able to do.
Wow.
All the best for the pod, lads. And that's from Jamie in Edinburgh.
Well, thank you, Jamie. That was, that's extraordinary.
Yeah.
So you know him from school?
Yeah, so we're at school together. He was a year above me, I believe. So I was kind of aware of his heart condition at the time, but obviously being a kid, wasn't particularly aware of it. But what I remember about Jamie is that he never let anything like that slow him down or get in his way. He was always having a kick about. He was always just doing things that young people do. And he's a big Hearts fan as well, so he's obviously all right in my book.
Yeah, clearly.
Has
he got an apron? Does everyone have to have an apron, or is it?
No, well, I don't think it's not mandatory. But
okay.
I had my Hearts apron on last night. I was cooking my roast dinner.
Don't. There's a mental image I could do with that.
And nothing else.
Nothing else, just my Hearts apron. Well, I found that we've dumbed down Jamie's story there. Why you like a butler in the buff? So I apologise, Jamie.
Yes, Jamie. Apologies for that.
But thank you for your email. That was lovely, and I'm glad you're listening. And I hope all is well. And hope you enjoyed episode 3.
Well, Lee, is there anything else that you want to add before we?
Yes, there is one thing I wanted to add, because obviously you're a big hit in the Leeds area with the Polar Express. Even though you're at your bell's end with Christmas.
A big what? A big hit?
Yes. Hit.
Right, okay,
I didn't bleep it out. It's fine. It was hit.
Yeah.
But I understand from Facebook, and obviously I can say this because it's obviously out in the public domain, that your lovely face may be appearing in The Crown. Is this correct?
This is true. This is true.
So which series? I've kind of lost track of what series is this now?
Okay, so we're currently on season 6. This is the last season of The Crown. And I appear as a minor character in episode 6 of season 6.
So what are you?
Doesn't come out till mid-December. So I'm playing the part of a pollster.
What's that?
I'll give you a bit of context. Right?
I thought they made electric cars.
Yay! He's here all week, folks. So So a pollster, in context of The Crown, the royal family run a bunch of focus groups to see what public opinion of the royal family is in 1999. So in the show, I am running the focus group in Edinburgh. So in this scene, there's one in Leeds, I think, actually, one in Edinburgh, one in London, and it kind of goes between the 3 focus groups to see what the kind of opinion of the public is. So you'll see me, assuming I've not been, cut out and on the cutting room floor in the end, you'll see me for a couple of minutes in episode 6 of The Crown.
Speaking? Are you speaking? Oh, right. Are you allowed? You can't. You're not.
I had to learn a little monologue and everything. But again, it's whether they decide to include it. I don't know.
Can you give us a line from it or not? You're not allowed to, probably.
I don't know.
Don't do it just in case they then cut it because you've then given away some of the dialogue.
Yeah, it's not because I can't remember anything.
No, not at all.
Not at all. No. So yeah, we'll go with the non-disclosure.
Non-disclosure agreement. You can't say.
Yeah.
Well, fingers crossed that you're in, and we can. So you think mid-December is when
14th of December it comes out? Yeah.
Right. So you might not be on till January though.
No, so they're releasing the whole, like they've released the first half of the season already.
Oh, I see.
The
Right.
second half gets released on the 14th, so you can binge from episode 6 onwards, I think, as of the 14th of December.
I might just watch episode 6.
Yeah, well, you don't have to go all the way back to the start on my account.
No. Anyway, right. Well, all the best with that. Don't get too famous too quickly because we have got some more podcasts to do.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, you don't know. Once this airs in December, we could have all sorts of offers on the table. I mean, who knows?
It's all right, Lee. If I get really famous, I'll take you with me, pal.
Oh, thanks, mate. That's beautiful. Right. Well, on that note, shall we say our goodbyes?
All right. Now, just before we go then, just a quick reminder that you can get in contact with us on the old socials. So you can find us on Facebook if you search for Mind Cake. We are on Twitter and Instagram if you search for @MindCakePodcast. And you can email us at sliceofmindcake@gmail.com.
I would like another email.
Yeah, another email would be nice.
Mm.
Because Jamie's one was such a nice surprise to open and read. So
It's a love.
Even if Jamie sends us a second email, that would still make me quite happy.
That's absolutely fine, but I am aware that we've probably lost a listener now because of the bleeping at the swearing. So we've probably lost Grant. So if we could gain another one from somewhere, just to say that, or our Norwegian listener to confirm or deny whether it is Sigrid, that would be tremendous.
All right. Well,
thank you for listening, all. We've had some lovely feedback, and I hope you enjoy listening as much as we enjoy doing it.
Yeah. We'll see you in episode 4.
4. Blimey. And they said it wouldn't last.
Let's see if we can make it to double figures.
Oh, blimey. It's a marathon. Right. Toodle pip.
Bye.
Bye. I wasn't expecting the oven bit, but that's okay.